It's not surprising that the world is feeling less secure. Alongside the war in Ukraine, there are currently 50 armed conflicts happening around the world today, a number which is more than doubled in the last 10 years. There's been a breakdown of arms control, and tensions over Taiwan are increasing. And then at the same time, we have this escalating set of environmental problems. Plastic pollution, soil is degrading, species populations are rapidly declining. Since 2014, we've seen 8 of the warmest years on record. And we don't need to go into academic textbooks or reports to see the consequences. In 2020, we saw one of the worst heat waves ever in China, a 1 in 500-year drought in Europe, devastating floods in Pakistan, wildfires in Canada, and a drought that's creating huge food insecurity in the Horn of Africa. An environmental challenge and a security challenge, 2 huge, enormous problems coming at us, parallel challenges vying for our attention. But what if I said that they weren't, in fact, parallel, but they were, in fact, linked? And if so, why are we not trying to address them together? My name's Claire McAllister, and I work for the Stockholm International Peace Research Institute. And for the last 3 years, I've been working with more than 30 researchers on a project that's been trying to explore how we can build an environment of peace. And today, I want to try and untangle why climate change and environmental degradation on the one hand, and peace and security on the other, are intrinsically interlinked, why they are making each other worse, and how, if we try and solve them together, we have a chance to build not only a more peaceful, but also a more sustainable world. Nearly half of the countries most vulnerable to climate change today are affected by conflict. Climate change and environmental degradation don't, by themselves, lead to conflict. But what our research shows is that they put pressure on lives and livelihoods. That in already fragile economic and social situations or places with weak governance do create tensions between societies, create competition over resources, and can lead to conflict. And in countries already affected by conflict, the effect of extreme weather can be devastating. Take Somalia, a country that is suffering one of its worst droughts in its history after 5 consecutive poor rainy seasons. That drought means less food on the table. It means more competition over resources. It means more tensions in communities. It means people have to move from their homes. 1 million Somalis have currently been displaced, often moving to crowded urban areas, creating yet more tensions. And for Al-Shabaab, that means they can take advantage of the situation, destroying critical infrastructure and attacking relief efforts. And all the while, the people in Somalia have less and less ability to try and prepare for the next crisis or to adapt to our changing climate. Environmental impacts making an already fragile situation more fragile. Environment and security feeding each other. And our research shows that these are not confined to specific countries. These impacts are now compounding and cascading all across the world. And Somalia, in fact, is just one of the countries that is being impacted by the war in Ukraine. Because alongside the devastating impacts for those people living in Ukraine, and alongside the increased security risks for the region, the decline in food and fertilizer coming out of the Ukraine and Russia has impacted food prices and food availability in many other regions of the world, some of which are fragile, some of which are politically volatile. And we've seen with energy as well, how the reliance on a fossil fuel-dependent energy system has meant an energy crisis for many countries, and contributing to a cost of living crisis. And then there's the impact on the environment itself, not just for the environmental destruction that we've seen in Ukraine from military operations, but also undermining international cooperation needed to address these huge challenges such as climate change and sustainable development. For many European countries, they've moved budgets to military and humanitarian spending, which means less resource and less manpower for things like climate change and development. It can feel like we've entered a new era of risk. There is a way forward, but it starts with acknowledging that these two crises are interlinked, and to address them, we need to address them together. It means understanding that the decisions we're making today have long-term consequences, and understanding those consequences as we make them. The science is clear. Every bit of warming matters, and the warmer the world gets, the more profound and the more widespread the impacts will be. Inaction on climate change and environmental degradation today increases the security risks of tomorrow. The known security risks, food insecurity, water insecurity, health crises, but also the unknown risks that come from potentially reaching ecological tipping points. And in a world, and those impacts, they will be hitting, the longer it takes for industrial countries to move away from fossil fuel economies, the higher the cost will be. Not just to the environment, not just to the economy, but to our lives and our livelihoods. Because if the COVID pandemic has taught us anything, it's taught us that what happens in one part of the world affects another part of the world. But it also showed us where there was a will to cooperate and address a problem, people could move fast. In a world of these global challenges, like climate change, we need to cooperate. No country can ensure the well-being of its citizens without international cooperation. Sometimes, with all the security challenges that we're facing today, it's important that that doesn't take place in a way that they're not addressed in a way that will affect the long-term security risks from climate change and environmental degradation of tomorrow. And it doesn't have to be a trade-off. In 2021, military spending surpassed $2 trillion. $5 to $7 trillion are estimated to be spent at the moment on direct and indirect subsidies, which are funding activities that damage our environment. And yet, at the same time, countries still haven't met the ambition of providing $100 billion for climate action. But if we understand the security impacts of not addressing climate change, can't we start to understand that investing in climate action is actually investing in our own security? So what does it mean to be trying to address these questions together? Well, it means integrating environmental considerations into our security plans and security considerations into our environment plans. It means integrating climate knowledge and action into development, into humanitarian aid, and into peace building. It means providing more climate change education to those people in peacekeeping missions. It means environmental provisions in peace agreements. It means better education about this twin environment and security crisis in classrooms, but also in boardrooms. Above all, it means trying to build not only a just, but a peaceful transition. Because what our research shows is that poorly designed environmental action can in fact increase injustice, inequalities, and potentially lead to new conflict, undermining the very goals, the very environmental ambitions that they're trying to achieve. But well-designed environmental action, that can create more resilient and more peaceful communities. And often it means bringing in the people most affected by those policies into the very beginning, into the design, and also into the implementation. Deliberately being inclusive, not because it's the right thing to do, but because it creates better outcomes. And it's also a question of finance. Between 2014 and 2019, the most fragile countries in the world received 1/80th of climate finance that went to non-fragile states. If those countries that are the most vulnerable and the least able to respond don't get access to the funding they need to address climate change, then we're setting ourselves up to fail. Feels like we're at a crossroads. The science is clear. We know what we need to do. Much of the technology is there, and yet we're not moving at the speed that we need to. These are existential risks. And this twin, environment and security challenge, is probably one of the biggest political challenges of our time. But it's also an opportunity. It's an opportunity to do things differently, to build a more peaceful, a more sustainable, and also a healthier world. Environment and peace are intrinsically interlinked. You damage one, you damage the other. But on the flip side, if you enhance one, if you protect one, you enhance the other. Yes, a lot of these questions feel like they sit with people far from this room. Governments, international organizations, multilateral development banks. Yes, they need to step up, to link up, to pay up, and we need to hold them account to do that. But we also have choices, and our choices have consequences. What you consume, who you consume it from, where you bank, where you put your pension pot, who you decide to vote for at the next election. Your choices send signals which can change behavior. It is possible to build an environment of peace, but we need to act now, and we need to act for the long term. It is possible to build a more just and peaceful transition if we choose that it's worth it, if we choose to make it happen. Thank you.